Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Rockies Daily. I'm your host, Scott Ayers, where we're talking all things Colorado Rockies. Folks, I'm back. I was celebrating 1 year of marriage with my wife. Shout out the power of love. And while I was away, the Colorado Rockies did something special. They decided to open up a can of worms, which was being just terrible at baseball in the month of May. They're 2-7. I'm recording this a few hours after they dropped the third game of the series against the Phillies. They dropped 2 out of 3. And truthfully, are pretty lucky that they even stole that first game. They blew a lead, which we will talk about in terms of just overall bullpen performance. They blew a lead. They win in extras. Thank goodness, because game 2 was ugly. And then game 3 in the series, the Phillies won 6-0. And it's Sugano this time who gets shelled. He goes 5 innings, 5 earned runs, gives up 7 hits. His ERA is now up to over 4. And the Rockies lose 6-0 in a game where they had 6 hits. The Phillies had 10, but really just not enough. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about this month of May so far for the Colorado Rockies, in which they are 2-7. And this isn't something where the Rockies, the offense has been bad. They've definitely had some games where it could definitely be better. But this 2-7 record is not reflective of the lineup. It is actually much more of the pitching. And that's what we're talking about today. Tuesday's show, we will talk about, we'll talk maybe more in depth about individual players. But for this show, kind of that broader overview as we get back into gear here at Rockies Daily HQ, population 1. But let's talk about the Rockies in the month of May. They're 2-7. They've given up 66 runs in 9 games. And we can pull from a lot of different groups for why the Rockies are 2-7. Let's first talk about, though, the bullpen. The bullpen, which was really good in the month of April, statistically a top 10 bullpen. ERA-wise, they were 6th in the month of April, right? Like, they were so good. But, man, now in the month of May, they have a 7.13 ERA. They have allowed the 4th most home runs so far, and they've had 17 walks. They've allowed 17 walks, 2 blown saves. Just bad stuff overall. And no one's really looked the part. Senzatella's been okay. But just as a whole, this bullpen has just been pretty disappointing so far. And we saw it in that game 1 against the Phillies. We started to see some cracks for this pen. But man, it's really shown so far in May. And you look at some of these other things too. The Rockies as a whole, because of this month, they're 20th in ERA with a 4.46 ERA, 3rd in home runs allowed. But they also are still first in strikeouts. One of the big things for this bullpen that you noticed in April, they'd be in jams and were able to get out of them, or able to limit the damage. And we just haven't seen that in May so far. They still have the 8th best WAR in baseball for bullpens, so it's not all bad. But one of the big issues, they have 181 innings pitched, which is the second most in baseball for any bullpen. And that was a concern. And this is more about the starting pitching, which we will talk about. But that's more of a concern. If this starting pitching can't get into the 6th or 7th inning, really, that becomes an issue. And that becomes an issue because you can see some of these arms start to get worn down. And we are seeing it. Just not enough from the guys in the bullpen so far in terms of keeping up that production. They just haven't been able to do it. And you look at some of those ERAs, and they are beginning to balloon. Jimmy Herget has an over 5 ERA. Vodnik has an over 6 ERA. Zach Agnos has an over 6 ERA. And so just not great overall when it comes to this bullpen, but they are not the main issue. For as disappointing as they have been at times, they are not the main issue. For the few runs that we've seen them give up in these games, they are not the reason why the Rockies are 2-7. It is the starting pitching. This rotation, it was a concern coming into the year. What will this starting rotation be with some of these older guys? Jose Quintana has actually held up his end of the bargain. He has an under 4 ERA. And so it's like, okay, you can live with Jose Quintana having an under 4 ERA if some of these other guys can continue to pitch well. Chase Dollander obviously has pitched well. He has a mid-3 ERA. He's been really good. But, man, some of these other guys have not been good. Ryan Feltner over 6. Kyle Freeland now a smooth 6. Michael Lorenzen, a 7.1 ERA. Sugano now an over 4 ERA after a great start in April. And, again, we'll do more of a kind of deep dive into some of these players for Tuesday's show. This is more of kind of that bigger picture of this rotation that wasn't good in April, has been even worse in May. They've given up 10 home runs, which is tied for the most in baseball. And the kicker, they have just one quality start in May, and they have 6 quality starts in total for the duration of the season. And I know we've talked about quality starts aren't everything, just because, look, a guy can go 5 2/3 and he might not be given the quality start. So it's not everything, right? The Rockies have probably had more than just 6. But still, that's a pretty glaring statistic. One of the big things, too, we just mentioned it, they have the second least innings pitched, meaning these starters are struggling to go deep into games. Really, the one guy you can think of that can consistently go deep into games is Chase Dollander. And outside of that, a lot of these guys are just struggling. Kyle Freeland, who had such a strong start of the year, he gets hurt, he's come back from injury, and he just hasn't been himself. Another kicker, this team they're not able to produce strikeouts. It's frustrating as a whole. They've allowed 32 home runs, which is tied for the most in baseball. There's just not a lot of positives when you speak about this starting rotation. There are a few. Quintana and Dollander have been positive. Sugano's start was positive. Hasn't been really great since. Freeland has been really disappointing recently. Michael Lorenzen is beyond disappointment. He has just been bad. He's been bad. And we talked about this a few weeks ago. ESPN mentioned him as like one of the trade targets that teams might go and get. I don't know who is seeking out Michael Lorenzen. I genuinely don't. I don't know if it's a team overseas. I don't know who's contacting the Rockies to get Michael Lorenzen, but if you're able to offer the Rockies even, a prospect who's 14 years old, doesn't even have facial hair yet, you might say yes if you're Colorado, just because the Lorenzen experiment has not worked so far in Colorado. And he's just an older pitcher, so it's not like you're not expecting a high ceiling to begin with, but that's just another side tangent. This rotation just hasn't been very good, and really at the start of the year we talked a lot about how it was the hitting that really let this team down, and some close one-score losses or one-run losses, excuse me. But really, it's the starting rotation, and I think the thing that really kills the Rockies is when they do get a good start, the bullpen has imploded. So they can't even have that consistency of like, I would rather just say, okay, our starter just got shelled for 10, our bullpen gave up 6, whatever. We'll chalk it up as a loss. Instead, it's like, hey, we finally got a good start. Bullpen gives up 6 runs. And you just can't have that if you want to be a competent baseball team. And so the Rockies have not been competent in the month of May. They've been bad. If you watched this show before, I like to be more of an optimist. I like to bring a little positivity to the team, but when it comes to pitching, there's just not much there for the start of this month. Doesn't mean the Rockies can't turn around. We talked about how the start of this month was going to be difficult because you're playing teams with talent. The Mets have been disappointing, but they have a lot of talent. The Phillies have been disappointing at times, but they have a lot of talent. Obviously, the Braves, super talented. So you played 3 really good teams, or on paper, really good teams, but still, it just hurts after the month of April that you had where you built up some really solid momentum. You come crashing down in May. So the Rockies will have some work to do just to kind of figure out some of this identity of who they want to be. Some of the guys that will be actual foxhole guys, for lack of a better term, guys that you can trust moving forward. And that's what these months of May, June, and July will consist of. And then obviously August, September, we get more of those younger guys that, hey, that's when Charlie Condon comes and shines. And you know what? We'll see when Condon gets called up. But still, you get the point. Let's end the show, though. The bats have actually been pretty solid in the month of May. They haven't been perfect by any means. But look, they're 12th in runs scored, which is great. They do have an issue where they've struck out over 80 times in the month of May, which is still league best. By best, I mean by far the worst. This team just strikes out way too often. But yeah, their batting average is middle of the road. 11th in home runs, 10th in slugging and OPS. And they're top 10 in a lot of different categories with runners in scoring position. Batting average, slugging, OPS, 14th in RBIs. So none of it's eye-popping stats of, wow, this lineup is changing my life. Thank you. But there are some legit positives. And in the month of May, Troy Johnson's been really solid. Batting .391 in the month of May, which is great. Jake McCarthy decided to show a little power in his bat for the month of May. He obviously has that absolute massive bomb against the Mets, grand slam, which was huge. Rumfield has been solid. Tyler Freeman has been solid. Most of the bats have been solid outside, really. The 2 guys at the start of the year that you thought might be pillars, Brenton Doyle and Tovar, both batting a smooth 100. And only Brett Sullivan has a worse batting average. And if they're batting 100, but of their 6 hits are all home runs, you'd be like, okay. But they're providing just zero power right now. So those are the kind of disappointing parts, because those are 2 guys that you really want to build around. For Brenton Doyle, that one stings a little bit more because you were looking to trade or flip this asset last year during the season, in the off season. Hey, we expect him to turn around. We expect him to kind of rebuild that value that he had lost. And his value just continues to go down. And so it becomes that point where it's like, hey, we just have to live with Brenton Doyle and hopefully he can figure things out. Because if he can't, that becomes a bigger issue for the Rockies, because you won't be able to really trade him. You won't be able to deal him with lower value. And it's like, well, how are we going to play him if we have some of these other guys that we just trust more in the outfield? And so I think as a fan, you obviously just want Doyle to be good in general, but there's a lot more to it. There's the GM side of it of, well, how are we going to handle someone like Brenton Doyle? Do we see him as a long-term fit? If not, can we deal him? And if both of those answers are no, you're in a tough place. But look, we've focused on too many negatives. Back to some of those positives is just some of those guys that have come in: Freeman, Rumfield, McCarthy, and Johnston. All acquisitions, all that weren't massive price tags, and all have been performing pretty darn well to start the month of May. So look, those are all good things. And, 5 home runs between those 4, Troy Johnston being the only one without a home run. But he's made up for it because he's batting nearly 400. Granted, it's just, 26 plate appearances, but 9 hits and 23 ABs is pretty darn good to start a month. So, look, some negatives, some positives. We were kind of all over the place. I'm getting back into the groove of things, but look, Rockies still have talent on this team. They have shown that they can compete with some of these some of these teams, but this has been a pretty bad stretch. And you hope that they can turn things around. They now have Pittsburgh, which, look, Pittsburgh had a pretty strong start to the season, and it's just not going to get easier, and you have to expect that as a fan, a player, regardless of what you are, the season's going to be difficult. So with that does it for another Rockies Daily. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, share it, you name it. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful Monday, and I will see you tomorrow.